Scientists examine Nefertiti's statue and discover a secret that changes everything. Join us on this epic journey through time. Like and subscribe to be part of the discovery. Unlike many other tombs in ancient Egypt, King Tutankhamun's tomb stayed hidden and untouched by thieves for 3,000 years. One reason for this is that the tomb was smaller than usual and tucked away in a spot called the Valley of the Kings. By the time it was discovered, the area had already been explored quite a bit, but Tut's tomb was hidden under debris from a nearby burial site, which probably helped keep it secret. There were no markings or signs outside the tomb to indicate what was inside. Time itself played a role in preserving the tomb in amazing condition until the 1920s, when a man named Howard Carter finally managed to open it. But was Carter really the hero everyone thought he was? Some recent findings suggest he may have been more cunning than we originally believed. Carter wasn't just a glorified treasure hunter, he was actually a trained archaeologist with a deep passion for ancient Egyptian artifacts.
My fascination began in childhood, and I eventually started sketching carvings and inscriptions found in ancient tombs.
After uncovering King Tut's remains, Carter spent over a decade cataloguing and handling all kinds of artifacts, from golden thrones and chariots to statues, and shipping them up the Nile to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. At least that's the official story. But newer discoveries claim that not all the treasures made it to the authorities. Apparently, a secret letter exposed Carter's personal 10 for them, one for me policy. The letter was sent to Sir Alan Gardner, a linguist and Carter's friend, and it dates back to 1922. In another letter from 1934, Carter asked Gardner for advice. Gardner later thanked him for a protective amulet Carter had gifted him, which Carter insisted didn't come from Tutankhamun's tomb. But it clearly did. Gardner compared the amulet to one from the tomb, and it was a perfect match. He was so upset at being put in that awkward position that he vented to Carter in another letter. Despite being disappointed, Gardner decided to stay loyal. He didn't publicly expose Carter. Instead, he advised him to return the stolen item to Cairo. Just like we'd advise you to like this video and subscribe to Brightside for more amazing history content. And that's not the only shady detail about Carter's behavior after the discovery. In 1947, a man named Alfred Lucas, who had worked with a controversial archaeologist, published a piece in a little-known Cairo journal. He claimed that Carter secretly broke into the burial chamber by himself and then resealed it like nothing happened. So why would he do that? The theory is that Carter and his team might have wanted early access to some of the valuable artifacts. Of course, they couldn't sell them while they were still alive. Too risky. But many items may have been quietly auctioned off after their deaths. Carter never officially admitted to any of this, but he also didn't deny it. Eventually, the Egyptian government got fed up with all the strange disappearances and temporarily banned him from entering the tomb. Some people even link the thefts to the infamous Curse of the Pharaoh. If you've never heard of it, it's the creepy legend that anyone who disturbs King Tut's tomb is doomed to suffer serious bad luck. It's not as dramatic as a mummy rising from the dead, but still, word spread that people involved in the excavation died under mysterious circumstances. The most well-known victim of the curse was Lord George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, the British aristocrat who financed the tomb's discovery.
He died just a year after it was opened. Mysterious? Maybe. But the truth is, Herbert was already in poor health when he arrived in Cairo and ended up dying from a common illness.
Now let's talk numbers. There were quite a few people involved in the excavation: security guards, archaeologists, support staff, and yes, a few of them did pass away not long after the tomb was opened to the public. As much as we'd love to believe in the curse, it does make for great storytelling. Statistically, if enough people are involved in a project, a few deaths over time really aren't that surprising. When you're dealing with something as legendary as the opening of an ancient tomb, you can expect a few random deaths to happen just by chance. In fact, the average lifespan of the people supposedly cursed by King Tut's tomb was over 20 years after the curse supposedly began. Even Lord Carnarvon's daughter lived well into the 1980s. That's more than 50 years later. And Howard Carter himself, he lived until 1939, a full 16 years after the big discovery. Some people have suggested the whole curse thing might have actually been a clever PR move. See, when Carter first found the tomb, he really wanted to keep nosy reporters at bay. So it's possible he made up the idea of a curse to scare them off and protect the site. But let's talk about what actually was stolen from Tutankhamun's tomb. Apparently, some pieces of jewellery went missing early on, and there's a strong possibility Carter himself took them. A French expert did some deep research by comparing old 1920s photographs from inside the tomb with artifacts found later in museums and auction houses. He started to piece together a picture of where some of Tut's treasures had ended up. First, there was a collar that had rested on Tut's chest. It was broken into pieces. Some of those pieces made their way through Carter to the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Missouri. Other parts ended up in a necklace owned by unknown individuals who tried to sell it in 2015, but they failed. Even the Nelson Atkins Museum acknowledges this. They confirmed the info on their official website. Then there's a headpiece and some beads from another necklace, which were also believed to have been taken by Carter. These are now on display at the St. Louis Art Museum. Another lavish ceramic and glazed necklace even spent some time at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, but thankfully it was returned to Egypt over a decade ago. And yep, that one's believed to have been swiped by Carter too. Despite all the missing pieces, King Tut's tomb still gave us an incredible glimpse into ancient Egyptian life. Starting with his famous golden burial mask, it's a 21-inch masterpiece made of gold, decorated with semi-precious stones and glass paste. It weighs 22 pounds and shows the young pharaoh with a long beard and a headdress featuring a cobra and a vulture. There's even a spell from an ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead engraved on the back, meant to guide him safely into the afterlife. And apparently Tut was a fan of board games. Archaeologists found 4 of them in his tomb, some made from ivory. They also found a pair of golden sandals, though those were probably more ceremonial than practical. He might have never actually worn them. Now let's talk fashion. King Tut was quite the stylish ruler. They even found a mannequin in his tomb, likely used to try on clothes and hang jewellery. Seems like he cared about his look. And as for music, yep, Tut might have had a musical side too. 2 trumpets were found in his tomb, and they were even played during a 1935 BBC broadcast. These instruments are so fragile now, though, that no one dares to play them anymore. Back in November 1922, a young boy walking through the desert hills of Egypt stumbled upon some ancient carved steps. That moment led to one of the most iconic archaeological discoveries in the world, the untouched tomb of King Tutankhamun. Inside, archaeologists uncovered over 5,000 artifacts, including jewelry, fabrics, decorated containers, and funerary masks. You've probably seen at least one of them. They've become symbols of ancient Egypt. It's been over 100 years since then, and now humanity may be on the edge of another massive discovery: the long-lost tomb of Cleopatra. Cleopatra was the last active ruler of Egypt, reigning from 51 to 30 BCE. While there are plenty of records about her rule and her unique personality, no one has yet discovered where she was buried or the full story of her death.
That's where I come in. I've been studying ancient texts and temples around Alexandria for decades. My research led me to believe Cleopatra's tomb might lie beneath the ancient city of Taposiris Magna, founded in 280 BCE. This was once a bustling city on Egypt's northern coast, where tens of thousands of people worked in trade and manufacturing.
Turns out, Dr. Martinez might be right. She and her team discovered a hidden underground tunnel stretching about 0.8 miles, carved into rock beneath the Taposiris Magna temple near Alexandria. As excavations continued, they uncovered several artifacts that suggest Cleopatra's tomb might be buried deep within that tunnel. And there's even a possibility she was buried alongside the Roman general Mark Antony, her lover and ally.
According to ancient records, the two were passionately in love and stood together against the Roman Senate. Some natural disasters have hit the area of Taposiris Magna for thousands of years, which makes digging there tricky. Earthquakes and floods have damaged the city and may have even flooded the underground tunnels, but we're still hopeful that Cleopatra's tomb might have survived and could be hiding some real treasures, even important records about royal life in Egypt during the country's last dynasty.
Of course, there's always the risk that the digs will get bogged down in mud, which means they'll need a lot of time and money, but the team believes it's worth it. It's still too early to say for sure that Cleopatra is buried there, but the discoveries so far are promising. They've found pottery, dozens of coins with Cleopatra's and Alexander the Great's faces on them, and even a bust of the Egyptian queen. Cleopatra remains one of Egypt's most iconic figures, right up there with Ramses III and King Tutankhamun. She's inspired countless movies, paintings, and books. What really made her so famous, though, is how complex she was.
I wasn't just a beautiful ruler. I was smart, politically savvy, and helped pull Egypt out of crisis to become a wealthy, powerful kingdom.
According to some medieval Arabic texts, she knew chemistry, math, and philosophy, and might have even written scientific books. She spoke several languages and was a skilled diplomat. At the same time, there are myths claiming she was a deadly seductress who drove men mad.
But there's no real proof that my beauty was beyond compare. That image was really built up by Hollywood, especially in all those films where glamorous actresses played me and I was shown as a manipulative femme fatale.
Even though Cleopatra was born in Egypt, she wasn't ethnically Egyptian. Her ancestors were Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. Still, Egyptians loved her. She learned their language and respected their traditions. She understood the culture, history, and mindset of ancient Egypt very well. Under her rule, the economy grew stronger, and Egypt held more power on the world stage. A big part of that success came from Cleopatra's cleverness.
I loved theatre, dramatic entrances, and luxurious celebrations, and I knew how to put on a show. But behind all the glamour and luxury was a sharp political mind.
Egypt at the time was wealthy and full of splendor, and Cleopatra did everything she could to make it even richer and more influential. For example, at one point she was in a power struggle with her brother. Cleopatra realized she couldn't beat him alone, so she aimed to win over Julius Caesar. When the Roman emperor arrived in Alexandria, she wanted to meet him, but he was suspicious and almost blocked her from visiting.
Instead of showing up with a big flashy entrance, I pulled a stunt. I had myself wrapped up in a rug, or some say, a linen sack, and my servants carried me straight into Caesar's private chambers. When I emerged, Caesar was struck by my boldness and charm.
They fell in love and became powerful allies. Later, she also managed to impress Mark Antony, another major Roman leader, for political reasons.
When I went to meet him, I dressed as the goddess Aphrodite and arrived under a fancy canopy. My servants were dressed as cupids, fanning me and burning incense. I went all out with the theatrics, and it worked.
I admired Greek mythology and thought of myself as a version of the god Dionysus. I was blown away and ended up marrying her.
With Antony, Cleopatra secured her power, strengthened ties with Rome, and even had 3 children with him. In Egypt, they threw lavish parties and lived in luxury and authority. But back in Rome, their relationship caused a huge scandal. Antony's main rival, Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, used the situation to his advantage. He launched a propaganda campaign, portraying Cleopatra as a wicked seductress and blaming Antony for falling under her spell. Eventually, the Roman Senate backed Octavian, declared Cleopatra an enemy of Rome, and in 33 BCE, the conflict came to a head.
My navy went up against Octavian's in a massive sea battle. Octavian won, and Cleopatra and I fled back to Egypt.
According to some records, they took refuge near Alexandria, but Roman forces pursued them. The couple reportedly hid out in one of Cleopatra's palaces, where they both died. As for how Cleopatra died, stories differ. One legend says she was an expert in poisons and provoked a venomous snake, maybe a cobra, to bite her. Another says she used a poisoned needle to kill herself.
There's a theory that I always carried a small vial of poison hidden in my hairbrush. When I realized I was trapped, I supposedly dipped a needle into the poison and pricked myself.
But honestly, no one knows for sure. Scientists are still trying to figure out what really happened. Maybe once they finally reach Cleopatra's tomb, we'll get some answers about her tragic end. She was the last ruler of ancient Egypt. After she died, Octavian looted her palaces and temples, then went back to Rome, where he became the first Roman emperor. He ruled successfully and expanded the empire's borders. His reign ended when he was 75. History might have turned out very differently if Cleopatra and Mark Antony hadn't lost that naval battle.
By the way, did you know something surprising? The time between Cleopatra's reign and Neil Armstrong's moon landing in 1969 is actually shorter than the time between Cleopatra and the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE. That's 2038 years before Armstrong set foot on the moon. But the pyramid was built way earlier, in 2560 BCE. Just imagine how long and rich Egypt's history really is. In terms of time, Cleopatra is closer to us than she is to the pyramids. When you hear the word mummy, you might get chills, probably because we've seen too many creepy mummy movies. But in reality, mummies have helped us understand a lot about ancient civilizations, especially how they handled death and honored their dead. And no one is more famous for mummies than the ancient Egyptians. They believed in life after death, but only if certain conditions were met. That's why they worked so hard to preserve the body through mummification and buried it in well-furnished tombs, kind of like giving the dead their own fully equipped apartment for the afterlife. Why did they believe in this so strongly? It's because they were deeply connected to nature. They watched the cycles of life, like how the sun rises and sets every day, or how plants grow again after withering away. They also believed in the powerful spirit Osiris, who represented death and rebirth, and played a role in the afterlife. To prepare for this next life, the Egyptians followed detailed rituals like mummification. This involved using things like honey resins and incense to preserve the body. Probably the most famous mummy in the world is King Tutankhamun, better known as King Tut. He was a young pharaoh who ruled more than 3,000 years ago. One big problem with finding ancient royal tombs is that most of them were robbed long ago. People knew that rulers were buried with valuable treasures, so their tombs became easy targets. But King Tut's tomb, discovered in 1922, was almost completely untouched, unlike most others. That's how well it had been hidden. Inside, his mummy was wrapped in 3 coffins, one of them made entirely of gold. The things found inside his tomb taught us a lot about what life in ancient Egypt was like. Studying his mummy also gave us insight into the culture and common health issues at the time. Thanks to DNA testing, we even learned about his family. Scientists found out he had malaria and a foot problem that probably made it hard for him to walk. Another important pharaoh was Ramses II. He ruled for 68 years, which was a long time back then, and was known for expanding Egypt's territory and building massive structures. Some of his statues and buildings still stand today. Ramses II was about 6 feet tall and lived to around 99 years old. After examining his mummy, scientists think he might have had a spinal condition. Remember those tomb robbers we mentioned? They might be why Ramses II ended up in a plain coffin, hidden among a secret cache of royal mummies discovered at Deir el-Bahari in 1881. Luckily, archaeologists could still identify him because his name was recorded on the wrappings, but it took a lot of work. Mummification in ancient Egypt was a long, detailed process. It could take up to 70 days. Specially trained people handled the bodies with care, dried them out using a type of salt called natron, and used resins and linen to make the body look lifelike. Then they wrapped it in cloth. The tomb itself was just as important. Take Tutankhamun's tomb, for example. The walls were covered in beautiful artwork showing his journey to the afterlife. It included scenes from his funeral and his path through the underworld. The Egyptians believed everyone went through this journey after death, which is why they filled their tombs with all kinds of things, and art, for the road ahead. To help people on their spiritual journey, the walls of tombs were often decorated with spells from a special book, a collection of poems the ancient Egyptians believed would guide the dead into the afterlife. That's how seriously they took this journey. People even placed food in these ancient tombs. In King Tut's tomb, archaeologists found 36 jars of ancient drinks and 8 baskets of fruit, believed to have been left to help him on his journey to the afterlife. Egyptians thought the trip to the next world could take a long time, so they packed plenty of supplies, food, water and other essentials to care for their loved ones. Pharaohs also had luxurious clothes and beautiful jewelry buried with them to ensure they traveled in style. These included all kinds of fine linen garments, like robes, scarves, gloves and head coverings, along with gold jewelry set with precious stones, bracelets, brooches, necklaces, rings, and even tiny decorative insect charms for protection. Some were even buried with fans made of ivory and ostrich feathers to help them stay cool in the afterlife. Believe it or not, some ancient rulers were buried with boats in their tombs too. For example, Pharaoh Khufu built the Great Pyramid at Giza to serve as his tomb. In King Tut's tomb, they didn't find a full-sized boat, but they did find many oars and 3 ceremonial chariots, along with walking sticks made of expensive materials. This might suggest that he preferred to travel by land rather than by sea in the afterlife. One of the most fascinating things found near ancient mummies was bottles of oils and perfumes. Because, hey, if the rulers were going to the afterlife, they might as well smell good too, right? Some mummies were even buried with board games made from materials like gold or ivory. One popular game was called Senet, which was kind of like a mix between checkers and chess, and was a favorite pastime in ancient Egypt. Now, while Egypt has the most famous mummies, they weren't the first to invent mummification. That actually began in South America with an ancient civilization called the Chintoro. As far as we know, they were the first people to preserve their dead through mummification, doing it over 2,000 years before the Egyptians even started. We've learned a lot about ancient rulers by studying their mummies, but for a long time we had no idea what they actually looked like when they were alive. That changed not too long ago when archaeologists discovered mummy portraits, highly detailed paintings of individuals done during their lifetime. These portraits were usually painted on wood, not canvas, and they're famous for how realistic and beautiful they are. Scientists have even used these paintings to diagnose ancient diseases by comparing the artwork to the actual mummies. Some of the jewelry shown in the paintings has been found on the mummies themselves. The discovery of these mummy portraits in central Egypt is huge because it's the first time in over 100 years that such paintings have been found. Mummies have also appeared naturally around the world. Mummification can happen without any human involvement if the conditions are right, like extreme cold or heat, low oxygen or chemical exposure. These environments don't allow bacteria to grow, so the bodies stay preserved. One famous natural mummy is Ötzi the Iceman, a man who lived around 5,000 years ago in Europe. When he was found in the Alps in 1991, Austrian authorities first thought he was a modern mountain climber because his body was in such good shape. But after examining him, scientists realized he was from the Copper Age. Now, picture this. It's night time, and you're about to walk into the final resting place of King Tutankhamun. You've heard of King Tut. You don't have a flashlight, but thankfully you brought a torch. You go down several flights of stairs and notice how the walls are covered in hieroglyphics and what look like ancient spells. One carving says something chilling. Anyone who steals from this place will be cursed for life. You might not believe in curses, but reading that in a dark tomb definitely gives you goosebumps. You find a massive stone door. Is it a trap? You manage to open it, but it's just an empty room. You check your map. It looks like you're heading the right way. Subscribe and explore the forgotten past with us. Like, share and support the journey of uncovering the truth beneath the ruins. Until next time, your next adventure